Um, is my screen visible? The slides, full screen?
Yeah, it's visible.
Yeah, great. So yeah, thanks for having me here. Uh, so my thesis topic was designing safe systems inspired by pain neuroscience. But before I go into it in more details, based on the sort of questions or doubts or queries you had earlier, like most people had, what I've done is that I'll just tell how the slides go. So like the first 5 to 6 slides are me talking about the what I actually did in the thesis, the journey, let's say what I did from August to December. Mine was in Sem 1 and so on. And then like the last 2 slides, I've added a few additional slides on answering or giving us answering your queries about how to apply for a thesis, or there's always a more structured way of going about doing these things, so as to ensure at least you get some thesis in the field you like. So that'll be the last 2 slides, but the majority of the talk will focus on what I did in my undergraduate thesis, and what the like just giving you a glimpse into the field and what the future of the field is. So my thesis was like the topic is situated at the intersection of many interdisciplinary fields, as you know. Um, Majorly, it was into safe reinforcement learning and computational pain neuroscience. Now, few of your like most of you might not be so much familiar with like reinforcement learning or maybe computational neuroscience. So I'll explain along the way. Uh, Also, one small thing. So when I wanted to get this thesis approved by, since I'm in Trip EC, I had to get it approved from the HOD, Abhijit Peke. So yeah, like you can get interdisciplinary projects approved if you frame it properly or yeah, tactfully enough. So when I had to get it approved, the title was Designing Safe Control Systems Inspired by Pain Neuroscience. By the time I submitted my report, the control word had dropped from the title, and nobody even managed to or even like managed to catch it or even bother to see. But yeah, that's just how bits works, I guess, nowadays. So, what is reinforcement learning? Uh, in a way, any sort of learning you do, there's an agent does, any learning agent does. It could be a human, an animal, or it could also be an artificial intelligence agent in code. Usually, so what supervised approaches in machine learning have been doing, as then you are given a training set or samples you'll learn from, and then you'll see, and then it is evaluated how well it does on the test set, as in on unseen samples, or unseen examples. Now, in real life, nobody actually gives you a training set as such, unless you are enrolled in a university. So, and again, like most primitive animals interact through learning. They don't have universities or schools as such. Pretty sure, like they don't. So usually it's through bunch of different things, imitation learning, like learning from the parents or someone in your community, as in the society, as well as learning from their mistakes as well as your own mistakes. So if you just remove the social learning aspect for a moment and like just focus on the individual learning aspect, then you know that most of the learning that happens in any sort of learning agent is through trial and error. Like you try, go out, interact with the environment, and learn from that experience. And so you could sort of see that every action you take, eventually somewhere down the line, either ends up in a reward or a punishment, and then you could like use it to track back and make a change as in improve your decision making using your prior knowledge of, okay, did the action in a similar scenario before help me get a better reward, then I should probably reinforce that action, and that's where the reinforcement learning comes into the picture. And then so usually if it's just one a single action, so from psychology, like experimental psychology from 1950s to 60s, so that's like the second half of the 20th century. Abundance of psychology experiments were done, but they were too primitive, as in they just had single or multiple like two actions. No, they did not have multiple actions up to like 8 or 10 steps or even more, and that's sufficient for simple psychology experiments where you might have heard about Pavlovian conditioning. The first thing that comes to your mind is mouth-watering dog who is given a shock or something like that. So all of these were quite simple in nature, but when you want to actually build things which are much more complex, you want to have some foresight of what will happen 3 4 days from now or so on. So that's when you are essentially learning about, like, learning a guess from another guess of. So that's what, like, a reductionist would call of temporal difference learning, which is sort of the foundation of the future or modern day reinforcement learning, and that's as put by Sutton and Bartow, who are like the forefathers of the field. And so this schematic just says what I said right now, and the the GIF that you see over here is sort of a simple deep reinforcement algorithm which I wrote in the initial 2 months of my thesis, just to see how things work. And like back at that time, we were still discussing whether we want to do something with more deep reinforcement learning or much simpler tabular reinforcement learning stuff. In tabular stuff, what you can do, you can actually keep a track for each state. Like, there's no approximation of states going on. It is much simpler, and it helps us, like, it's easier to validate with any sort of computational neuroscience studies with human subjects. So when we are saying that RL is an algorithmic framework, and that's where, like, computational neuroscience as a field is heading towards. What we had from psychology experiments is that we knew the broad behavior that an animal would show given to some scenarios, given to some contingencies or conditions. Would it show avoidance? Would it show some sort of helplessness, and so on? Then came some sort of ideas or just broad equations which were very generalized, as in it did include some equations from reinforcement learning, and they said that, okay, this is a computational model of what's happening underlying, but there was still no, like, reproducing those behaviors that were seen earlier, right? It was just explaining the phenomena using a computational model. So it's again just fitting a bunch of equations to see what was happening. Then came, like, magnetic resonance imaging, which was like which did the big boom that we see right now in computational neuroscience, because whenever the subject was given the task, relying on behavioral outputs, you could also just, it's like showing a torchlight at the brain and seeing, like, which parts of the brain light up. Simply put, that's what functional magnetic resonance imaging, or fMRI, is. And so in a way, people want to know, okay, so when the human or any subject is doing some task, which part of the brain is getting involved into that? And that's where the, you could say, from computational to implementation level of understanding arose. So like, now which parts of the brain actually implement the stuff, like implement some sort of vision or audition, and that's where the visual cortex comes into picture, and so on. And now where we are moving towards is at an algorithmic level of understanding of the field. So that's when we want to reproduce those behaviors using this algorithm. So that's like, yeah, that's like the sort of embodied AI that we are talking about. striving towards an understanding that if you could reproduce those behaviors using an algorithm in simulation, then that adds a greater deal of validity to the studies. So enough talking about what the field is going towards, focusing more on safety. Reinforcement learning is pretty strong, but it hasn't yet been used very widely in industry because there are a lot of concerns about safety. As in, it does provide a whole lot of adaptive, it adds to the adaptive nature of algorithms because if you, let's say, if you are making a robot which is supposed to let's say leg robotics, where you are supposed to have some sort of leg walking motion in a robot, then fixed control systems are good because they will sort of work well on like flat terrains and everything. But the moment there is some sort of difference in like slipperiness or there's unpredictability, you want a wider range of motions such as twisting and turning uh, briskly, then for that adaptive nature you need some sort of learning systems. But then there are no guarantees for worst case scenarios. So what would happen in the worst case? And that's where safe reinforcement learning comes into picture, especially when robots are now working with humans. You wouldn't want to hurt the human. So that's the more robot side of things, where there would be some sort of hard constraints, and you want to minimize harm to other entities. So that's sort of more robot-like understanding. And then there's more human-like understanding. We usually don't think of stuff in terms of hard constraints, right? So we usually think in terms of soft constraints, as in, and more importance is given to self-preservation rather than minimizing hurt or harm to someone else. Uh, like you would obviously want to minimize harm to someone else, but again, there is like if you try to compare the value of a human life and a robot life, obviously you would value human life more, and that's why the people are thinking of uh, hard constraints in cases of robots. So from a computational neuroscience perspective, what is more interesting or is focused more is how do humans or animals think in terms of safety of their own self, and they definitely don't think in terms of hard constraints. And so I did a review of safe reinforcement literature in like the first 2 to 3 months, which was like July, August, September. And in that time, I read like a bunch of papers, like from computational neuroscience to even robotics, computer science, even the hardcore stuff of computer science, which I had never learned, uh, which was some sort of theory of computation and those sort of stuff, because that came under like verifiable exploration. Like if you could verify uh, the exploration policy beforehand, as in even before taking the action, verify whether it's right or wrong, then that's the best way of implementing a hard constraint. But we eventually focused on just soft constraints because that's how humans think about. Then there are various ways how humans would implement that. There are reflex actions. Then there's a thing called Pavlovian fear conditioning, and so it's basically just conditioning you to learn about pain, the value of pain that you are going to get, and then influence that in your actions. I'll discuss about this more later. And then there's lots of stuff I tried, like there's distributional RL, where rather than just using the mean of the output return that you are going to get, using that to learn, or what if you just use a whole distribution of returns, and that's when I was making this deep RL algorithms, because then we realized that okay, the boon or like whatever stuff that dispersion is giving, it's leveraging the power of function approximation, which is like deeper neural nets and so on. And the same won't show for like you won't see an advantage for linear approximations and so on. But then that also sort of ended in a dead end because we saw that distributional RL only improved efficiency and not necessarily safety. And then, so that also depends on how, coming back to the earlier part and actually helping us clarify our own definition of safety. What do we mean by safety? What is of importance to us when we define safety? Yeah, and then what we eventually came to an understanding and is that for humans, safety and anxiety are more or less the two sides of the same coin. Uh, there could be a similar or same underlying model which could help us tell about the adaptive nature of safety as well as the maladaptive nature of anxiety and long-term depressive disorders and so on. There's also two sorts of anxieties. Like there's one induced anxiety, uh, and so in healthy subjects as well. And then there's people who are actually affected for long term, and then that sort of depressing sort of anxiety and helplessness and so on. So like the big questions along the way were what to focus on, and the early on we decided to focus on safe exploration. Then deciding on how do humans and animals do it and what contributes the most to it. And we usually sort of the major parts are going to be reflex actions and Pavlovian fear conditioning. And that's the major ones. Reflex actions are fast enough. You know that they are quite fast, but they are quite primitive as well. And Pavlovian fear conditioning, also reflexes are innate. So I did try a few things with the reflexes too, and try to relate it with verifiable exploration, but that too ended in another dead end. We might revisit those things later on. So like that's how your thesis is going to be. Like you'll start with some literature review. You'll try out different things. Most of these will end up in a dead end, and then you'll through each dead end you'll get more and more clarity about the field and like even your project itself. Uh, and throughout, I was discussing with my prof about this. Uh, yeah, and then what do the simulations tell us? Because anything that the simulation tells us, we can take it later further on to test it with actual human subjects. Yeah. And then with the Pavlovian fear conditioning, we sort of narrowed down on Pavlovian instrumental transfer, which is something which my professor is like too much excited about. Like, yeah, since 2005 or so, he has been doing working on this. So, yeah, and then so you'd ask what is Pavlovian learning, what is instrumental learning, and what is the transfer between these two systems. Simply put, consider an example where you are making tea or coffee and yeah on the stove, and then you accidentally touch the vessel or whatever the thing is called, and then you get burnt. So that's the pain that you are feeling, and yeah. So what does it tell you? Like it tells you not to touch that vessel again while it's on the stove, but but then that's still just Pavlovian learning. Like what the instrumental action would be is to turn off the stove and then wait for it to cool or use some sort of cloth before picking up or like using the plastic handle to pick up and not touching the metal part and so on. So the instrumental action is something which would be guided by the uh, there will be multiple options or actions, and you would have an understanding. Okay, this particular action is sort of uh, going to avoid from pain or give me reward and so on. And the Pavlovian is much simpler. It would just help you estimate the value of pain you are going to get into that state, and it would just improve the impetus or increase the impetus of the withdrawal action. It would not nudge you towards turning off the gas stove or something like that. It would just so you would forever be deprived of coffee for the rest of your life. So yeah, there's some sort of arbitration happening between the two systems, and we tried with different like if you have a fixed high value of Pavlovian system, it increases safety over like all these ways, but it comes at the cost of efficiency. That's what we showed, like in the simple examples. And then I'm not going to disclose this right now because it's still we are just still like completing the draft of the paper, so it's not published. But there's some hypothesis about our brain. So there's some magic sauce happening, which is the blue line you see over here, which solves this dilemma between safety and efficiency. So, and that's how humans keep themselves safe and efficient at the same time. So it sort of improves on safety as well as improves on efficiency at the same time. Future work, as I said, there's any simulation, understanding from simulation can help us get it tested with human subjects with more ease, because a lot of stuff goes into when you're doing human studies. You have to actually get those 20 subjects or 30 subjects, whatever. You need to do all those ethics and stuff. You need to have access to an fMRI machine. There's lots of money involved. So this makes it all easier having a theory paper beforehand. Uh, what people might be interested would be, can we have anxious robots? And then, as I said, where in the model can we show, which is I'm actively working on or thinking about at the moment, is that draws the line between adaptive safe and maladaptive anxiety. Uh, yeah, I could talk about this, but I think I'm already around 25 minutes in. So maybe I'll just use these two slides if you have any questions on applying for thesis. And so I'll just hand over to Raghav for now. Yeah.
Raghav, your mic is off, I guess.
Oh, yeah, sorry, my bad. Yeah.
That's good.
Um, yeah, thanks. Hi guys. I hope all of you are safe and healthy. And Pranav, that was pretty insightful. And this is the first time I've actually gotten to know the entirety of Pranav's story. Pretty interesting. So I'll just hop into my presentation. Just give me a second while I share my screen. Right. Okay. Uh, yeah. Hopefully my screen is visible and so is my presentation. Um, my thesis was at UCLA under Dr. Mayank Mehta, and we were I was pretty much I was pretty much in charge of building a multimodal virtual reality system for small animals, and we'll get into what that meant in a bit. So before I start, I'll tell you why my case, like my thesis, was slightly unique. Um, as you know, you guys have an option like thesis versus PS, right? And you have to make that choice. And for some people, it's quite an easy choice. Some people are research oriented, hence thesis. Some people are industry oriented, hence PS. There's also another perspective that one might, have, is that like which was my dilemma. Um, uh, I wanted to have a taste of a bit of both, right? So which is why I was torn between these two, and also like it's a good thing for you to have some research experience under your belt if you're applying for if you're applying for graduate studies abroad. That research experience is highly valued. So yeah, and I was torn between PS and thesis because I had gotten mixed information about how a thesis would benefit slash impact my future in you know research and maybe applications to grad studies. And then later on, like I made up my mind quite late, like around late February, which is later than most other people, right? Because it takes time to draft your emails. Like Pranav had like two full slides of that stuff. It uh, it takes a while to draft your emails and send them out to professors. So and before that, you have to shortlist potential research advisors. So yeah. Um, so my take on this is a thesis is highly beneficial. So this can be like a reason for you to choose thesis over PS. A thesis, you should go for a thesis if you're research oriented, and um, or if you plan on applying to grad studies. Okay, it will be much more beneficial for you, if it appears on your um, this thing, grad application, right? So that's how I made up my mind about going for a thesis over PS. Second point is my thesis was more dev oriented than hardcore research. Like you saw Pranav's presentation and his thesis was quite theoretical. Mine, on the other hand, I built on something that already existed. Right. Um, so this multimodal virtual reality system for small animals already exists at the lab at UCLA. But it's really old. The first generation system was built, yeah, I think in 2009. So it's really old, really outdated. So it was in dire need of an upgrade, and that's where I came in. And so my project was to build the second generation of that virtual reality system. Now, it was dev oriented, but it could have been otherwise. It was dev oriented more so because uh, uh, I think for the first time, the thesis for most people was remote, right? So that is another additional hurdle slash challenge that we faced, which made things interesting. And yeah, I'll probably get into that once we go through the rest of the slides. Okay, cool. So here are some details about my project. I was at the WM Tech Center for Neurophysics. So my professor, my supervisor, Dr. Mayank Mehta, he is in the biology and physics departments at UCLA, and his field is neurophysics, right? So that's where I came in, and yeah. So just a short gist of my project. I'll get into some more specifics. So this virtual reality system was made for small animals. So small animals include rats, flies, and I can't really think of any more. But the lab that I was working with, they used rats and mice mostly. But you can also use like houseflies, right? And yeah, the first generation of the system was built back in 2009, and the second generation, which I built, uh, was based on the same hardware. So now virtual reality systems, as some of you may know, there are two kinds of virtual reality systems. One is a cave system, wherein the virtual environment is projected onto a room uh, a room like environment. Like say the subject is in a cubicle room or a cylindrical enclosure, and the virtual environment is projected onto the cubicle enclosure using cameras, right? So that is a cave system, and the other is a handheld or a mobile system like um, uh, what do you call it? Oculus and that sort of stuff. So for rats, obviously the uh, system of choice was cave system, and uh, the cave system used at UCLA, it's basically a cylindrical enclosure. The rat is at the base of the cylinder. Let me see if I can get, uh, get an image of the, yeah. Yeah. So this is like a schematic of, not a schematic, but like a rough outline of what that system looks like, right? So here's the rat, and this is sort of a cross section, so it's actually a cylinder, right? And the projection is kind of interesting, and I'll get into that. It was one of the major challenges for me uh, in this um, in this project. So yeah, this is what the system looked like, right? So yeah, cool. Uh, so that was my project, and that was built on this graphics engine called Ogre 3D, and um, and they had a lab, you know, they have a lab which fabricated PCBs and other chips to control the hardware side of things, and they fabricated those components in house. So they were highly custom. So there were two drawbacks to this. Ogre 3D is now deprecated. Um, you have much more powerful engines like Unreal and Unity. I used Unity, right, to write the code. And this thing, highly custom components, that makes the system, not very robust and unscalable. Right. So that was the hardware side of things, and and even from home, I was able to contribute to the hardware side of things. I'll get into that in a bit. Right. So that was the hardware side of things, and the software side of things. So the hardware is pretty much fixed because like this setup is uh, pretty this thing. It doesn't need to be changed. However, the software needed a major upgrade. So that's where majority of my work was. Although I did influence the hardware choices as well. And here's a link. I don't know. Will the CT team be able to, like, if I send like some of my presentation has a few links. If people are interested in checking them out, um, I could paste this into the chat, and yeah, I think that should be the easiest way to go about it. I just paste it. You guys can check it out. Right. So that's just the my professor, Dr. Mahajan Mehta, talking about the effects of virtual reality in on the brain. Right. So yeah. All right. So before I get into this, I'll tell you the like the reason I took up this project. So I'd been working with Vicky sir since I think 2019, September 2019, and that got me into neuroscience, and I was really interested in working at the intersection of computer science and neuroscience. I'm a computer science student, by the way. So that's how I got into it. So with that in mind, I applied for a thesis in computational neuroscience. This isn't computational neuroscience. However, like there were some developments. Like I got in touch with Dr. Mehta, and we agreed to have like a project dedicated to computer neuroscience, like computational neuroscience. However, there were some developments along the way, and this was the project that I was assigned, which I'm not mad about. This was actually pretty, it was a pretty cool project, and I learned a lot. Right. So yeah, and virtual reality. So um, like if you watch that video, you'll get a better idea. However, I can tell you um, there were experiments. So they conducted experiments on rats using this virtual reality system, and they found that certain parts of the brain were inactivated when the rat did the same task in the real world versus the virtual world. And so there were differences in the neural activations, and that was the interesting thing. And that's the significance of this virtual reality system and why they are using it to conduct experiments. Right. Uh, so yeah, that was the motivation for this project. And now I'll get into my contribution. Uh, I think before that I should, yeah, this slide should have come before. So yeah, my preparation. Um, I like this project was finalized in the month of May. Right. I started applying around late February, and a few days in, like I sent about 25 emails or so. People usually send more. I was lucky to get positive responses sooner. So around 25 emails in, Dr. Mehta gave me a positive response, and after all the logistics and um, after all the logistics was taken care of, in the month of May, I actually started uh, preparing and working towards this project. So here is a little bit of my background. I told you about my background in neuroscience. I took Dr. Dr. Vicky Bhatt's course, Introduction to Cognitive Neuroscience. Highly recommended to anyone who wants to get started in neuroscience. He makes it super. So this is like a free plug for Vicky, sir, if anyone wants to tell him. So yeah, Introduction to Cognitive Neuroscience, highly recommended. He makes it super fun. It's super chill. You learn a lot, and hopefully you can even get to do a project with him or under him, right? That's how I got started. I joined the course, and along with Pranav, uh, I did a research study um, under VP. So that's how I got my start in neuroscience. And then around May 2020 was the time when BITS gave out this thing. BITS arranged for Coursera courses for us, if you guys remember that. So I took advantage of that, and I had not used Unity before. I had a choice between Unity and Unreal to build this project. I hadn't used Unity, so the first course, Introduction to C# Programming in Unity, surprisingly good course for given it was on Coursera. Some of the courses on there are not that great, to be honest. This was surprisingly insightful, and I learned a lot. So, and that was one step towards my preparation. Then another course on Arduino. Now, one great thing about this project was that it gave me insight into, like, not only insight, I had to work in various spheres. Obviously, computer programming, um, uh, development, hardware, uh, this Arduino over here, computer graphics, because I had to build and construct certain elements for the virtual worlds. Mathematics, there was this projection thing that I showed you, like this projection. So basically, if you like, you guys uh, know how projectors work, right? It it basically projects it onto uh, a flat surface, right? So that's fine. That's how normal projectors work, right? Now this one needs to project. Now this thing needs to be projected onto a cylindrical surface, which is kind of weird and not so easy. That was one of the major challenges, as I mentioned before. So the way they do it is they project it onto sort of a hemispherical mirror, which you can see over here, which is placed at the top of the cylinder, and that mirror sort of spreads it outward, right? I hope you guys can picture that, right? So, um, so in order to achieve this thing, um, you know, I had to do some computer graphics stuff, which I'll get into, and it needed some mathematics to calculate the points at which these light rays would be hitting. Right? It's kind of grateful for Match 2, was it? Yeah, M2, a little bit of M2 in there. So yeah, that's how that went. Um, so Arduino. Uh, so a lot of the hardware, like I said before, they were fabricating components in house. However, that's I mean, I don't think it was expensive, but not scalable and not sustainable at all. Because if it gets damaged, they'll have to go through all of that work again just to create one part, which doesn't make sense at all. But that was the existing system, right? So I proposed and uh, you know I proposed that uh, those uh, those chips be those controllers be discarded in favor of Arduinos, which are readily available, cheap, and versatile, right? So yeah, and there was lots of improvisation to cope with the constraints that came with the remote work. Yeah. So if you guys see this, so this trackball, it's basically like a huge treadmill for the rat, and there are sensors. These sensors sort of you know um, gauge the position of the ball and its rotation, the rotation of the ball, and hence determine which way the rat is moving, and accordingly the avatar in the virtual world will move, right? So that it's basically like a FPS game, right? Think of it as an FPS game, and uh, rat is the first person, right? So this ball thing, right now you see it's a sensor, right? Now even this thing was upgraded. I upgraded this to use a computer vision solution, wherein this ball is sort of checkered. I don't know if I have that. This ball sort of has a pattern, and using that pattern, a 2D map of that ball is formed, right? Out of the uh, from the 3D, a 2D map of that ball is found, and using just a webcam. So these sensors work like the sensors of an optic mouse, right? So one optic mouse can, uh, you know, sort of this thing, move your cursor, say. Uh, an optic mouse can move the cursor in a 2D plane, right? So using that and an additional optic mouse sensor, you can have both uh, movement in a 2D plane and rotation, right? So like the rat can rotate. So so there were two sensors, right? These two sensors um, placed orthogonally so that they can have both the movement and the rotation covered, right? So instead of that, using a single camera and a computer vision system called FICTRAC, uh, this was replaced to, so these sensors were out of the picture, and I had to sort of simulate this thing, the ball with the pattern. So that was uh, some improvisation on my part, right? So how to choose your thesis? Again, we'll take this up later, as Pranav said. So yeah, what I gained from this experience, this is interesting, because these are the reasons that you might, you know, uh, have to take up a thesis. I got a strong letter of recommendation. So my professor kindly agreed to write a letter of recommendation for me while I was applying for grad school, and the timing was kind of nice because I completed the bulk of my project um, in this thing, uh, like right before December, and December is when the graduate application deadlines are. So by that time, I had finished a good chunk of my project, and I presented it to Sir, and he was happy with my work, and he agreed to give me a letter of recommendation. Also, I was more in contact with a PhD student who I've gotten pretty close with, and so yeah, so he helped me out a lot, and that is going to be a common thing. Like Pranav was lucky to have more of a one-on-one this thing, one-on-one rapport with his advisor. I was mostly in touch with his PhD student, and that will be the case for most of you, which is not an issue, right? Second thing, I learned new skills. Computer graphics I had never touched before. Virtual reality again, never. Um, and and also some of the hardware stuff, Arduino, and all of that stuff. That was pretty cool. Introduction to a new field. Virtual reality was something that always fascinated me. However, I did not get the chance to, venture into that space. So yeah, this was great for that. And now, the interesting thing is now we are working, now that the foundation of that system has been laid, we are working on, making it uh, even more interesting in that we are creating new virtual worlds uh, that were previously not possible with the first generation. So now it was just me and the PhD student who was working on it for about 9 months or so, 9 to 10 months, and then a couple more students have joined in who wish to work on the project. UCLA students. So now I'm mentoring them since I know this project pretty well, and that's a fun experience as well. So I'm mentoring them, and we are creating some new virtual worlds. And now that most of the development work has been completed, now I'm getting more involved with the neuroscience side of things, uh, researching what sort of worlds we can create and what we can achieve with those worlds, right? And lastly, a lasting relationship with my mentors and colleagues. I'm still in touch with Dr. Mayank Mehta. I'm still in touch with Chinmay, who was the PhD student. And I'm hoping that I'm pretty sure that I will be in touch with them for quite a long time. Okay. So these are some of the reasons that these are some of the things you can look forward to, right? And these can be good reasons for you to pursue a thesis. So the future for me, and like I'll tell you from my perspective what happened, right? So as I was searching for my thesis, right, I saw like Dr. Mehta had. This is the last slide. Yeah. So I saw that Dr. Mehta was working in virtual reality in neuroscience, right? And it led me to explore stuff like HCI, which is actually pretty interesting and quite interdisciplinary. You guys should check it out. HCI is human computer interaction. So I recommend you guys to check it out. It's pretty interesting, right? So being a CS student, I wanted to incorporate my interests and my expertise into my work in neuroscience. Neuroscience is something I recently got into, and I found really insightful and interesting. And I found that I was quite good at it, understanding it and learning it. So I wanted to incorporate these two things, and HCI is a field that will allow you that opportunity, right? So now the thing is, I found a professor at UC San Diego, and I even emailed him, but he did not respond to my email. Like a lot of professors, like Pranav will tell you, and others will tell you, a lot of professors have like filters because they get bombarded with lots of spam and lots of these sorts of requests, and they can't be bothered to go through all of them. So they will have third-party filters in place to weed out all this stuff, and that's probably why I didn't get a response. But his work was really amazing, and I actually followed his work extensively over the last uh, uh, 6 months or so. And he's at UC San Diego, and I am actually heading to UC San Diego this fall. Uh, I applied and got him, so I'm actually looking forward to working with him. And I probably and it was one of my primary reasons to apply to UC San Diego as well. They have like great departments in the fields that I'm interested in. So these kind of things. So it wouldn't have this wouldn't have been possible. Like the sequence of events wouldn't have happened had it not been for the initial thrust that the search for the thesis provided. So yeah, that's all I had for that's all I have for you guys. And let me know if you guys have any questions. Robin, do you want to mediate and ask if people have any questions?
Yeah, so everyone, whatever questions you have, you can put it in the chat box right now. The speakers would be helpful.
Or actually, there's not that many people, so it's okay if they unmute and ask. I don't think it'll be that clear.
Okay, maybe that would be more interactive. If you guys want to ask questions, you can even unmute yourself if you're comfortable and ask the questions.
Also, you had floated, uh, yeah, you had floated this thing Google form, right? Did you get any responses on that?
Yeah, we got a few responses, but eventually
Yeah,
we
I'll share a few questions from there once the ones from the chat one.
oh,
Okay. I see a question from Surud in the chat. I'll just answer it. So yeah, I didn't explain the hard and soft constraints in much detail. Um, so you could think of hard constraints as something that is completely unavoidable, and while learning, so there will be um, reward-based optimization that's happening, and then you would have a separate set of things, let's say constraints, and you would associate some sort of costs um, with those constraint violations. So if you violate that constraint, that could be absolutely not allowed to go in some no-go zone for navigation, or yeah, it could be anything like uh, yeah, like if you're walking through a footpath, you're absolutely not allowed to go on the main road. So that's a pretty hard constraint, and that's for the safety of the others in the environment. And so you'll have some cost associated with that, and now you'll not only optimize for the net cumulative return, but these costs as well. And these costs could eventually end up in pain, but again, there's no account, not much account of robots feeling pain. So in a sense, that is very non-human or non-animal like in nature. idea of constraints in itself, and that's what I'm referring to as hard constraints. In case of soft constraints, what I'm saying is that not exactly constraints, but so these are sort of induced by being overly sensitive to pain. By pain, we could just for a moment refer to negative rewards as pain in the system. Like if you receive a reward of, let's say, some -1, then you are feeling a pain of +1. And then if you are overly sensitive to pain, then in a way that's a soft constraint. So the whole idea throughout has been that human brains do not treat positive rewards and negative rewards or pain in the same way. Their their lookout is sort of twisted and modulated by the scenario they are in, the anxiety they are facing, the uncertainty they are perceiving, and a bunch of other things. Their aspiration levels, if you aspire to gain more, and that sort of stuff also comes into studies of gambling and drug addiction too, actually. So sort of this imbalance between how they are processing these two streams is how one is another way or more human-like way of inducing these soft constraints, as in to avoid further harm to oneself. Yeah, I think that answers the question. But if you have more question, you could contact me on WhatsApp later.
I posted a few questions from the query form in the chat section. You can answer some of them.
How did you come to know that you want to pursue research in neuroscience? How did you come to know more about it? Yeah, so I think I can speak for both Pranav and myself. We both got our start uh, with Wiki Sir's course, right, Pranav? Right. That's true for you as well, right?
Yes, yeah, we both work together on a project. Yeah.
Yeah, and as for computational neuroscience, uh, Pranav also worked under Prasad. And Pranav and I both worked under Thesis uh, on a research project, and that's how we kind of got us start in neuroscience and working, like actually working in neuroscience in conjunction with other fields is how you would know that okay, this is for me and this is interesting to me. I'd like to do more. In fact, if you take up Wiki Source course, I'm pretty sure you'll get opportunities uh, to work in neuroscience through Wiki Sir, or he'll direct you to uh, you know uh, appropriate resources and people.
Yeah, I can definitely agree on that. So I actually through Wikisir and along with Wikisir, I'm working this semester, which is like 4-2. It's with another professor in computational neuroscience, Boris Butkin at ENS Paris, on a similar computational reinforcement learning sort of stuff uh, applied to drug rewards and so on. So like I'll definitely agree on like Wikisar's course being one of the best courses we have taken in bits. And actually, just to add on that, I myself was like up until second year, end of second year, I did not have much knowledge about neuroscience. I was mostly into ML and the other aspects of ML, including RL, but RL applied to robotics and not much into neuroscience. It was actually third year, and third year I also took like machine learning CT course as a co-instructor with yeah, Rajaswa, who is also here in this meet. So in a sense, it's after like through the third year when I worked with Basavata ma'am, Vicky sir, and so on, I got inclined into hi Rajaswa. I got inclined into neuroscience and then started looking at the intersections of the two because almost everything in ML, not almost everything, but like most of the things in ML are sort of trying to get more and more inspiration from neuroscience. So might as well just look into it in more detail. Uh, Actually, to answer the next few questions, I think I could share my screen. Yeah, and we both could answer.
Yeah.
Me and Raghav.
Yeah.
So yeah, there is a possibility that you won't get your thesis at all in fourth year. And what does one do then? Then one could aim for a 4-1 thesis. If you don't get in 4-1, what you could do is then try to delay it to 4-2 if it doesn't work out. So I'll share my experiences too, and I think Raghav was also actively thinking about that because yeah, he started much later in like February, which is in a sense too risky in my opinion. But then he was still deciding between PS2 and thesis. So like if you're unable to even shift it to 4-2, then might as well just do a PS2 and try to work remotely or then apply to the same prof for an research assistantship in after your studies are finished. I think that would work best. Uh, Many experimental labs decline opportunities. How do you still get an opportunity? That happened to me too. So I'll just share this part of the slide and I'll talk about all of it. So the first way you should do is that what one could do, not like it's just my opinion, cast as wide as a net as you can. So when I started, I was not 100% sure that I want to do neuroscience. It could like around 50% was still I want to do something related to neuroscience, but I was still gauging other ways like that there was vision science, there was again sort of Harvard Med School sort of stuff what they do. There's robotics and CVA, all sorts of stuff. So I think both me and Raghav made like the spreadsheet of our own with name of the professor, position, university, what the most recent main paper is that they are actively thinking about working on. Usually, more established profs have 10, 20, not 10, 20, but at least 5, 10 different things going on at simultaneously, where each PhD student is sort of leading each thread of their ideas. So look at that through the Google Scholar page, get to know more, read those papers, and then this is sort of time consuming, but it's kind of worth it. And if you could read the main paper, at least the abstract and the conclusion, future work, if you could point out few future work which relates to your previous work, where you can suggest some original idea, then that's something that you would want to include in the email. So that would be something that would catch their attention, might want to follow up into a conversation with you, have an interview, and so on. Yeah, and then this is just a more structured way of doing it. Especially now, most profs and thesis is research based, so there is always a thing about like an idea of publication. It's better if you can if your thesis ends up in a publication. It did not necessarily, but it's better. So all of these profs would be attending conferences, and those are virtual at the moment. So it's not a, a completely lose-lose situation. There are some wins along the way because now virtual conferences are cheaper and you can attend them and you can collaborate with them or at least meet up and talk to them in these conferences. And so then they will be more likely to read your emails, follow through.
I think like this thing,
Hmm.
uh, being left behind because of COVID will be less of a reason now.
Right.
Because most of the Western world, wherein most people target to get thesis, uh, it's looking good now. Like the COVID situation is looking good. And even in places like Australia and Singapore, it's all good. It's only this place, like India, that's screwed. So yeah,
Yeah.
so don't worry about it. And don't worry about COVID being much of a factor. But um, Pranav went into detail about how you can pitch it.
Yeah, so like COVID and resigning of offers or withdrawal of offers impacted me more actually. So in a way, I think Raghav started much late in like February. I had started much early on because I was sort of focused on like okay, I want to do a thesis. I am not much interested in PS2, and so the Oxford prof I was in touch with him since October, but then the process with in Oxford is much longer, and there's after my interview, we had back and through of many emails, and then what happened was he had to send in a proposal to his department. That's only UK specific thing. That's not not
I
US
think
specific.
no, like if he had to, if he had to have you as a student in his lab, the
Yeah,
logistical process would be sort of similar all over the place. It's just that because it was remote, that
yeah,
those logistical things didn't come into play. Like if I were to go to Dr. Mehta's lab, he would have had to, get some processing done for me to actually uh, go to this thing, the embassy, and say, okay, I need a visa because I'm going to work at his lab, and
yeah,
then I'll have to show that official letter on his letterhead and stuff. So
yeah.
that sort of stuff will be common. I mean, it's not. I don't think it's UK specific, but I maybe the UK processing and logistics is a bit more involved.
Yeah, that's true. Like it's more involved, and like he had to do that, get the project idea, um, sort of get it accepted and approved from the department, even for a remote thesis. Like even to like work with him for the 6 months remotely. In my case, and so that was just under review for at least like 4 months, and then in so actually if you start early, January first week is the first week after long vacations, and that's when they'll all open up and read through each one of their mails. So that's when I and most of my friends who are applying got the most replies. So it could be better to start early. Then that's when I got an interview call from MIT Media Labs, and then eventually I got the offer. But so I was initially planning to go there, but then that got withdrawn just 2 weeks before the thesis uh, deadline at BITS. And then I had a backup at ISC too, and then that guy also said last minute that okay, I don't think anything would get processed. He's in lockdown and so on. And then I again went back, like emailed my Oxford prof and like just asked him like by when would the review from the department like get over with. And then he tried to expedite the process, and eventually the department there said like approved, and then like it luckily just worked out like 2 days before the deadline. So yeah,
Although bits is a bit flexible with the thesis deadline, they
yeah,
do push it back more often than not. Yeah,
right.
I think that's enough for the second question. Third question: how much experience does someone really need in order to get a thesis in a particular domain? Uh, Tricky question because like I had zero experience in this thing in virtual reality, and uh, and I still ended up doing a pretty decent job. Um, like you have to, I think experience is important, but you also have to uh, back that up with interest. Like the professor should be, should be convinced of um, your dedication to the work. Right? So yeah. For my thing, I highlighted my work with Vicky Sir because that was kind of the only experience in neuroscience I had, but it was substantial in my opinion, and I pushed that forward. And I also included some of my work in CS. Like that's how I pitched myself. I was like, okay, I know this kind of stuff. I've done this sort of work, and I'd be happy to explore the work at your lab because I think it's compatible with the work I've done so far and the work that I'm looking to do in the future. So that's how I pitched it. And whatever experience you have, like there's this thing in at least US universities. There's this thing called FIT. You'll hear it when you apply for like grad studies as well. For those of you intending to do that, something called FIT. Uh, it just means that how compatible are you as a person with your skill set and your, I'd say, personality with that particular position as a research assistant or a research fellow or a student, right? So if you display like, yourself, like if you portray yourself as a good fit for the position that you're applying for, they usually go for that. Now it seems a bit abstract, and it is. Um, I honestly like whenever someone says, "Oh, you need to be a good fit," I'm like, "Oh, I, I mean, this doesn't help me at all." And it sounds pretty frustrating, but that's exactly what it is. Basically, you have to show that okay, I belong here. That sort of thing. Pranav, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I just like completely agree with trying to show that you are a good fit, and that sort of will show in your email. So, okay, wait, maybe I could just present my screen once again if that helps. Um,
You should. So I had the link for the thesis email guideline that you had made,
yeah.
and like I had the link to that. You should post it in the chat later.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll post it. Yeah, so I had compiled a list of emails that I had written. So in no way like those are spectacular emails, but I think that gives an idea of like what a good email might look like and what a decent one would look like and what a really poorly written email would look like. So usually,
I'll go ahead and I'll go ahead and drop it in the chat.
yeah, please do that. Uh, so like first paragraph, if you just tell like what you want to pursue, it's good. Like, if that you want to pursue a thesis and why you want to do that, your plans for higher studies, and then second, if you could just point out to a research paper that they have recently worked on and like just critically analyze it in like 2 to 3 sentences, pitch some idea that would catch their attention, and they would want to discuss more with you. And then like after that, if you could just briefly explain the relevant projects you have done. As Raghav said, if you have even like one really solid project which you can sell yourself upon, that's more than enough. But it has to be a really solid project, and then that's all. Like maintain basic email courtesy, and this level of personalization is enough. And how many you want to send emails, it's up to you.
Yeah, start early. Is what I'd say. It got really stressful for me since because I started late, but thankfully I got like a couple of positive responses relatively soon. So yeah, I think we've covered the questions in the chat. If you guys have any questions right now relating to either of our thesis, or if you just want to ask us anything else, so go ahead.
Yeah, like we could send our like phone numbers on the chat, and like people can ask anytime.
Okay, that's generous.
Okay. Yeah.
My phone is kind of low right now. But yeah, well,
Cool then.
If there are no more questions, I think we can conclude the session now. I would like to thank both Pranav and Raghav for coming here today and sharing the experiences. It was really a pleasure having you on board. Thank you.
yeah. I think we have one question that popped up right now.
Okay, sure.
Let's just take that up and before we finish. Amateur doubt, but why have you said to avoid main trackers? Because it's a 50-50 thing.
Yeah.
Some people don't mind it, some people are offended. They're like, they're like, why does this dude want to know if I read his email or not? Like, can't he wait? On the other hand, you would like to know that, okay, the professor has read the email, or maybe he has missed the email, and accordingly, you can time whenever you want to send your response. I took a risk and used a mail tracker. It didn't backfire. Actually, it did. One email I sent, it had that mail tracker signature at the bottom. I forgot to remove it. But otherwise, I suggest avoid mail trackers because some people don't like it. If you start early enough, you won't need to use a mail tracker. Uh, I used a mail tracker because I started late and I wanted to keep tabs on what emails are being read, and then accordingly, time my reminders. Yeah, that is the ideal, right? All right.
Cool. This was
Okay, I
the
guess
last.
we can finish the session, I guess.
All right. Thanks
Thank
for
you,
thanks
everyone.
for having thanks for having us. I
Thanks.
guess. Wait,
HOD. Wait, we have another question.
another question. Okay. Usually, if the HOD approves the thesis, would get confirmed, right? There's some logistics involved. Yeah, one of the steps is the HOD approval. Then, once you get to that stage, they'll ask you to fill out some forms. They'll ask you to, they'll ask your off-campus supervisor to fill out some stuff, like sort of an agreement that they will mentor you and supervise you and evaluate you on certain parameters. So there's that.
And you will also need to find an on-campus supervisor. So since my approval, like the whole thing happened very late, like just 2 days before the deadline. Like on the same day as the deadline, that morning I called up Rakesh Warrior at the Professor Rakesh Warrior in Triple department. And then he agreed to be my on-campus supervisor, and no one else was agreeing to become my on-campus supervisor. So that really like saved the day, but don't delay that sort of stuff.
Yeah, so Karthik, if you get your thesis approved by the HOD, yeah, that's a significant step forward in you getting to do your thesis. So yeah, like Pranav said earlier, frame it such that it fits in your department's you know uh, work. You should be good. And yeah, thanks everyone for having us. This was
Yeah,
fun.
thanks.
Uh, bye guys. So bye Pranav.
Bye, bye, Raghav.
Yeah.